Cadet Jessica Martinez fought the urge to roll her eyes as Chief Instructor Zexalak's antennae twitched with barely concealed disdain. The 7-foot-tall Arxian's crystalline exoskeleton caught the artificial light of the simulation chamber as he loomed over the 3 human cadets. "So, these are the Deathworlders." His translator clicked with what passed for amusement in his species, the ones who scored so impressively on their physical trials. Behind him, 24 alien cadets from across the galaxy watched with varying degrees of interest and contempt. Most species at the Galactic Military Academy had evolved on worlds with gravity ranging from 0.3 to 0.7 Earth standard. To them, humans were nothing more than brutish curiosities who somehow managed to develop spaceflight despite their primitive origins. Mike O'Connor, standing to Jess's right, maintained perfect parade rest, despite the chamber's 1.1 G setting. His family's military background showed in every line of his posture. James Walker, on her left, seemed more interested in studying the simulation chamber's holographic projectors than the sneering instructor. Today, Zexalak continued, his crystalline mandibles clicking, "You will attempt the siege of Kethral simulation. For the past century, it has served as the ultimate test of defensive strategy. No team has ever completed it successfully." A hologram materialized in the center of the chamber, showing a massive fortress carved into a mountainside. The structure's architecture was clearly alien, with sweeping geometric patterns that defied Earth's understanding of structural engineering. "The scenario is simple," Zexalak's translator chirped. "You must defend the fortress against a superior force for 6 standard hours. You have access to the fortress's standard defensive systems and may requisition any additional equipment from the Academy's basic inventory." Jess studied the hologram intently, her eyes narrowing as she noticed something about the terrain rendering. Growing up in Colorado's mountains had taught her to read landscapes in a way few others could. "Sir," she said, keeping her voice carefully neutral, "what's the gravity rating of Kethral?" The question seemed to catch Zexalak off guard. His antennae twitched again, this time in confusion. "The simulation is set to 1.4 standard. Most species find it challenging." Mike and James exchanged quick glances with Jess. Earth's gravity was 1.0 standard. They'd been training in conditions like this their whole lives. "Permission to begin preliminary analysis, sir," James asked, his fingers already twitching toward the hologram controls. "Granted," Zexalak said, stepping back. "Though I should warn you, the current record for fastest failure is 3 minutes and 42 seconds. Try not to embarrass yourselves too quickly." As the instructor moved away, Jess heard credits changing hands among the observing cadets, all betting on their failure. She stepped closer to the hologram, studying the mountain's composition, while James pulled up the fortress's specifications. "Guys," she whispered, a smile tugging at her lips, "look at the rock strata. This whole mountain is limestone and granite, just like back home." Mike's eyes lit up with understanding. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" "Earth tactics," James muttered, his fingers flying over the holographic interface. "They're all using energy shields and plasma cannons, but with this gravity and terrain. We go old school," Jess finished. She turned to the requisition terminal and began typing. "First, we're going to need about 2 kilometers of standard rope." The alien cadets watching them burst into chittering laughter as her requisition list appeared on the main screen. Ropes, pythons, basic explosive charges, and what appeared to be primitive sound amplification devices. Zexalak's translator made a sound somewhere between a scoff and a choke. "You intend to defend against a modern siege force with pieces of braided fiber." Jess met his compound eyes with a steady gaze. "Sir, with all due respect, you're about to learn why humans were the galaxy's original siege masters." She couldn't help but notice how his antennae froze when he saw her smile. It was the same expression her climbing students wore just before she taught them something that would change their perspective forever. "Begin simulation," she commanded, and the world around them transformed. The holographic terrain materialized around them with stunning clarity. Mike immediately dropped to one knee, pressing his palm against the simulated rock face. The haptic feedback was perfect. Every crack, every fissure, every potential handhold. "Nice to see the Academy spends its budget on quality tech," he muttered, grinning as Jess tested a steep incline with her boot. "This is better than the Mars training sims back home." Behind them, the alien audience had grown. Word had spread about the primitive Deathworlders attempting the infamous Kethril scenario, and now various species crowded the observation deck. Credits continued changing hands as bets were placed on their imminent failure. James was already deep in the fortress's computer systems, his fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. They'd got enough processing power here to run a small planet, but look at how they're using it. He shook his head in disbelief. Every single previous attempt focused on powering up the shield generators and automated defense turrets. How'd that work out for them? Jess asked, though she already knew the answer. Longest anyone lasted was 43 minutes, the power requirements for maintaining shields against sustained bombardment. He whistled. They couldn't keep up. Everything overloaded. A high-pitched trill of laughter cut through their conversation. A Vesperan cadet, their gossamer wings shimmering with amusement, called down from the observation deck. "Your primitive materials won't last 10 seconds against plasma cannons, Deathworlders." Mike stood up, brushing simulated dust from his knee. "Hey Jess, what's the terminal velocity in 1.4 G?" She ran the calculations quickly, her eyes scanning the cliff faces. "About 40% higher than Earth normal. More than enough for what we need." She turned to the requisition terminal again. "James, can you get me a topographical overlay? I want to see every natural choke point in these valleys." The fortress's surroundings appeared in wireframe, and Jess's smile grew wider. The alien designers had created a perfect killing ground. They just didn't know it yet. "Look at these approach vectors," Mike said, pointing to 3 major valleys leading to the fortress. "They're thinking like space-age warriors. Everything's about energy weapons and shields. But in this gravity, heavy weapons will be a nightmare to maneuver." James finished, understanding dawning on his face. "And their transport units will be limited to these exact paths, unless they want to waste fuel fighting the gravity well." Zexlak's voice cut through their planning. 3 minutes have elapsed, cadets. Perhaps you'd like to actually activate some defensive systems before the simulation properly begins. Jess looked up at the instruction deck, where the crystalline alien stood with his arms crossed. "Oh, we're activating defensive systems, all right. James, shut down everything except basic life support and minimal lighting. Divert all power to storage." The fortress's external lights dimmed, its shield emitters going dark. The alien observers burst into fresh rounds of laughter and conversation. A Meridian Cadets translator could be heard clearly. "They're making it even easier for the siege forces. These humans are more primitive than we thought." But Mike noticed something else, a subtle shift in posture among the few veteran instructors present. They weren't laughing. One of them, an ancient-looking Taurian with battle scars across its carapace, was watching them with an unsettling intensity. "They see it," Mike whispered to his teammates. "The old warriors. They recognize what we're doing." James finished his power adjustments and pulled up the enemy force composition. Incoming in 3 minutes, 5 waves, heavy on energy weapons and hovering siege platforms. They're expecting a technological battle. "Then let's give them an education in gravity," Jess said, finalizing her requisition list. "Mike, you've got the north and west valleys. James, I need you to set up those sound amplifiers in the cave systems. I'll take the east approach and the main ridge." She turned to her teammates, her eyes bright with the thrill of impending combat. Time to show them why Earth's mountain warfare doctrines are still taught after 10,000 years. The simulation's warning klaxon began to sound. The siege was about to begin. The first wave of siege forces appeared on the horizon. Sleek, hovering platforms bristling with energy weapons and shield generators. In the observation deck, the alien cadets leaned forward eagerly, expecting to witness another swift failure of the Kethril scenario. Instead, they watched in confusion as the three humans split up, none of them manning the fortress's defensive turrets. "Martinez, those charges are set on the East Ridge." Mike's voice crackled over the comm. He moved with surprising speed in the high gravity, his movements efficient and purposeful. Looking at their approach vector, they're following the exact same path as every other attempt. "Of course they are," James replied, his voice echoing slightly from deep within the cave network. "The AI is programmed for optimal energy weapon positioning. They're not thinking about, hold on." A series of metallic clicks echoed through the comm. "Sound amplification network is online. You should hear what I'm hearing." Through the shared audio feed, they could all hear it, the deep, resonant rumble of the siege platforms struggling against the heightened gravity. Each massive vehicle was burning through power just staying airborne. "Just like home," Jess said, securing the last of her pythons into the limestone face. "Remember that training exercise in the Rockies, when we had to disable those hover tanks?" Mike chuckled. "Hard to look intimidating when you're struggling not to crash." In the observation deck, the Zexalak's antennae twitched irritably. "The siege forces are at maximum effective range. Still no active defenses from the humans. This will be over quickly." The ancient Taurian instructor shifted uncomfortably. "Chief Instructor, look at their positioning. The humans aren't in the fortress." "What?" Zexalak zoomed in on the tactical display. Indeed, none of the human life signs were where they should be. Instead, they were spread out across the surrounding peaks and valleys. James's voice came over the shared channel again. "First platform entering the cave mouth in 3, 2, 1. The sound that erupted from the cave system was unlike anything the alien observers had ever heard, a horrific, rolling thunder amplified and focused by the natural acoustic properties of the limestone caves. The lead siege platform sensors went haywire, its stabilizers faltering as the sound waves interfered with its gravity compensation. "That's what happens when you rely too heavily on electromagnetic sensors," James said with satisfaction. "A little acoustic overload and suddenly your fancy targeting systems are useless." On the East Ridge, Jess watched through binoculars as the first platform wavered. "Mike, they're compensating. Just like we predicted." "Roger that." Mike's voice was calm, professional. "Triggering first sequence." The charges they'd placed weren't powerful explosives. They didn't need to be. In 1.4 G, the carefully positioned small blasts sent torrents of loose rock cascading down the valley walls. The siege platforms, already struggling with their stabilizers, couldn't compensate fast enough. The first platform clipped a ridge, its shields flaring uselessly against the purely kinetic assault. It spun, crashing into the second platform behind it. Within seconds, the neat formation had devolved into chaos. In the observation deck, stunned silence fell as the aliens watched the supposedly invincible siege forces fall into disarray. The Taurian instructor's mandibles clicked in what might have been appreciation. "Now for the fun part," Jess said, uncoiling a length of rope. "James, hit them with Program 2. The cave network came alive again, but this time with sounds that made several alien observers step back in instinctive fear. The recorded battle cries of ancient Earth armies, digitally enhanced and strategically projected to seem like they were coming from everywhere at once. Psychological warfare, Mike explained to no one in particular as he prepared his next series of traps. Amazing how universal the fear of the unknown is. Through the chaos of falling rocks, impossible sounds, and failing technology, Jess's voice carried a note of fierce pride. "Welcome to Earth-style mountain warfare, ladies and gentlemen. We're just getting started." The simulation clock showed only 12 minutes had elapsed. The real siege was about to begin. The simulation's AI did exactly what centuries of technological advancement had taught it to do. It adapted. The second wave of siege platforms spread out, their formation looser, shields modified to deflect debris. They activated their advanced terrain mapping systems, searching for the hidden human cadets. "They're learning," James announced from his position in the cave network, adjusting their sensors to filter out the acoustic interference. "Clever." "Good," Jess replied, her voice tight with concentration as she free-climbed across a near-vertical cliff face. "That means they're looking in completely the wrong direction." In the observation deck, the alien cadets had stopped laughing. The tactical displays showed the siege forces advancing with far more caution than any previous simulation run. Even Zexalak leaned forward, his crystalline features catching the light as he studied the unfolding scenario. Mike's voice crackled over the comm. "Remember that story my grandfather used to tell? About the Battle of Dien Bien Phu? The one where the French didn't look up?" Jess grinned, reaching her position. "James, kill the cave acoustics. Time for Phase 2. The sudden silence was more unnerving than the noise had been. The siege platforms hesitated, their sensors straining to pierce the darkness of the valley. That's when Mike triggered his masterpiece. The first platform never saw the camouflaged wire nets dropping from above. In 1.4G, the simple metal meshes fell with devastating force, tangling in anti-grav generators and weapons arrays. 3 platforms went down before the others could react. "Impossible," a Vesperan cadet chittered. "Their primitive tools couldn't possibly." The rest of the sentence was lost in the thunderous roar of Jess's gambit. She'd spent 10 minutes setting up a cascade of rockfalls, each precisely calculated to trigger the next. In normal gravity, it might have been manageable. In 1.4G, it was like watching a mountain come apart. "See, that's the thing about gravity," James commented casually as he worked. "It's the one force you can't shield against. It's just there, always pulling, always waiting." The siege platforms scattered, their formation completely broken. Some tried to gain altitude, burning through power reserves to escape the avalanche. Others attempted to push forward, their shields blazing as they tried to deflect tons of falling rock. None of them noticed James's third surprise until it was too late. The fortress's stored power, diverted from its defensive systems, surged through hidden conducting cables in the valley floor. In the high-gravity environment, the platforms couldn't maneuver fast enough to avoid the sudden electromagnetic pulse. "Basic physics," James announced proudly as half the remaining platforms lost power and dropped from the sky. "Everything conducts electricity, even fancy alien metals." The observation deck erupted in chaos. The alien cadets argued furiously about the humans' tactics, while the instructors huddled around tactical displays, analyzing every move. "This is not warfare," Zexalak protested. "These are the tactics of savages." The old Taurian instructor's translator crackled with what might have been laughter. "No, young one. This is siege warfare in its purest form. Watch and learn." Mike was already moving to his secondary position. "Jess, you've got incoming." 3 platforms broke through, heading for the fortress's main gate. "Let them come," Jess replied, her voice eerily calm. She stood on a narrow ledge, one hand gripping a piton, the other holding what looked like a simple remote detonator. After all, we needed some of them to make it this far. The platforms surged forward, their crews likely celebrating being the first to ever reach the fortress gates. They never saw the cables hidden in the canyon walls. They never noticed the peculiar arrangement of metal spikes driven into the rock at precise intervals. They never realized that the entire approach was one giant conductor until Jess pressed the button. In 1.4G, lightning always strikes down. The simulation clock showed 21 minutes. The 4th wave was already incoming. The 4th wave emerged from hyperspace differently, more cautious, more spread out. The AI had analyzed 3 waves of failures and adjusted its strategy. Instead of massive siege platforms, these were smaller, more agile units, hunter-killers, designed to track down and eliminate guerrilla forces. In the observation deck, confidence began to return to the alien observers. "Now they'll be caught." A Meridian cadet chittered. "No place to hide from thermal scanning." The old Taurian instructor's battle-scarred carapace shifted as he shook his head. You still don't understand what you're watching, do you? On the tactical display, the human signatures had vanished completely. Sir, a junior instructor called out, we've lost tracking on the Deathworlders. Zexlak's crystalline form sparkled with agitation. Impossible. The simulation's sensors are perfect. Find them. Deep in the cave network, James smiled as he activated his next series of programs. Mike, remember that summer we spent in Death Valley, playing hide and seek with thermal drones. Mike's voice came back, barely above a whisper. Best training exercise ever. Across the battlefield, dozens of heat signatures bloomed suddenly. Some moved like soldiers, others remained stationary. The hunter-killer units split up, pursuing multiple targets. The thing about perfect sensors, James continued, his fingers dancing across his portable console, is that they can be perfectly fooled. The first hunter-killer unit cornered its target in a narrow canyon, only to find a small heating unit paired with a motion simulator. As it turned to leave, the walls of the canyon shifted. Not much, just enough. In 1.4 G, that's all it took. 3 more units reported similar findings. Each time they approached a target, they found decoys. Each time they tried to retreat, the terrain became treacherous. The AI was learning to fear the very ground beneath its simulated forces. Psychological warfare works on AIs too, Jess commented from her hidden position. Especially ones programmed to learn and adapt. Right now, it's learning that every action it takes leads to failure. A haunting sound began to echo through the valleys. A low, rhythmic drumming that seemed to come from the mountain itself. In the observation deck, several of the younger alien cadets stepped back instinctively. What is that sound? The Vesperan cadet's wings trembled. The Taurian instructor's translator clicked softly. War drums, one of the oldest psychological weapons in galactic history, and still one of the most effective. James had synchronized the drums with the fortress's subsonic resonators. The beat matched the frequency of the hunter-killer's sensor arrays perfectly. With each boom, their targeting systems suffered microsecond delays. My great-grandmother used to tell stories, Mike said as he prepared his next trap, about how her unit would use sound to break enemy morale. The mind fills in the blanks when it can't understand what it's experiencing. The hunter-killers began to malfunction. Their adaptive programming, faced with an environment that defied their baseline logic, started generating errors. Some units reported seeing massive armies in the shadows. Others detected phantom energy signatures that vanished when investigated. In the fortress's computer core, James watched as the AI's decision trees became increasingly chaotic. It's beautiful, he whispered. The more it tries to adapt, the more it fears what it doesn't understand. How many units left active? Jess asked, her voice barely audible over the continuing drums. 7, James reported, and the 5th wave is holding position at the system's edge. The AA. I think it's actually hesitating to deploy them. Mike's laugh was quiet but satisfied. Ever wonder why humans tell ghost stories? We learned a long time ago that fear of the unknown is stronger than fear of any weapon. On the tactical display, the remaining hunter-killers began to retreat, their programming unable to compute a winning scenario against an enemy it couldn't understand or predict. The simulation clock showed 24 minutes. The 5th and final wave waited in orbit, facing a choice no AI had encountered in a century of running this scenario. The fear of failure versus the fear of the unknown. The 5th wave didn't descend like the others. Instead, it split into 3 groups, holding high orbit while conducting deep scans of the battlefield. The AI had finally abandoned its standard protocols entirely. Look at that, James whispered, watching the tactical display. It's trying to write new combat doctrines in real time. We actually forced it to evolve. In the observation deck, the alien cadets had fallen silent, their earlier mockery forgotten as they watched history unfold. The old Taurian instructor had moved closer to the tactical display, his battle-scarred carapace reflecting the holographic light as he studied the humans' positions. "Sir," he addressed Zegzlak, "in 10,000 years of warfare, I've never seen an AI adapt this dramatically during a single engagement." Zegzlak's crystalline form shimmered with barely contained agitation. "They're still just primitive Deathworlders. The simulation will prevail." "Jess," Mike's voice was tight with concentration, "we've got multiple atmospheric entry trajectories forming. They're trying something new." "Good," Jess replied, her fingers dancing across her portable console. "James, remember that trick you taught us about predictive algorithms? The butterfly effect." James grinned. "Already on it. Mike, I need you to trigger sequence 7. Make it look random." Mike activated a series of small charges across the battlefield. Not enough to cause damage, just enough to send vibrations through the mountain. In the high gravity, the effects rippled outward, creating patterns in the sensor readings. "The thing about AIs," James explained as he worked, "is that they're really good at finding patterns. So good that sometimes they find patterns that aren't there." The first group of the fifth wave began its descent, following what their advanced algorithms told them was the safest approach vector. That's when Jess's masterpiece revealed itself. She hadn't just been setting up traps. She'd been calculating. Every rock slide, every avalanche, every piece of debris had been positioned with mathematical precision. In 1.4 G, the entire mountainside had become one giant physics equation waiting to be solved. "My mother used to tell me," Jess said, her finger hovering over the final trigger, "that the best way to win a fight is to make the enemy defeat themselves." She pressed the button. The mountain moved. Not in isolated rock slides or controlled avalanches this time. The entire face of the cliffs seemed to come alive, every piece of debris from the previous battles creating a cascading chain reaction in the heightened gravity. The AI's carefully calculated safe zones became death traps as the very mathematical certainty it relied upon turned against it. "Pattern recognition complete," the simulation's AI announced. "Tactical assessment. Impossible scenario detected." In the observation deck, chaos erupted as the tactical displays showed something unprecedented. The fifth wave was retreating. "No." Zegzlak's translator crackled with disbelief. "Override. Force them to attack." "Sir," the Taurian instructor's voice carried an edge of respect, "the AI has determined that victory is mathematically impossible. It's preserving its forces, exactly as it was programmed to do when facing an unbeatable scenario." James looked up from his console, a mix of awe and satisfaction on his face. "We didn't just beat the simulation. We taught it to fear us." The remaining hunter-killer units from the fourth wave, still trapped in the valleys below, began powering down. Their command protocols, receiving the retreat signal from the fifth wave, executed their final option: surrender. Mike emerged from his position, walking easily in the high gravity that had so hampered their opponents. "Should we tell them this is basically just a more extreme version of how we used to defend mountain passes back on Earth?" Jess laughed, rappelling down from her perch. "Let them keep guessing. Sometimes the legend is more valuable than the lesson." The simulation clock showed 27 minutes. Above them, the fortress's original defensive systems remained powered down, untouched and unnecessary. The supposedly primitive tools of ropes, rocks, and human ingenuity had accomplished what centuries of advanced technology could not. The scenario was over. The impossible had been achieved, and in the observation deck, a new understanding of human warfare was born. The simulation chamber hummed as it powered down, reality bleeding back into view. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence in the observation deck was absolute, broken only by the software of diagnostic systems running post-scenario analyses. "Time to completion. 27 minutes, 12 seconds, the computer announced. "Scenario status. Complete. Defense successful. New Academy record established." The holographic displays began showing comparative data from previous attempts. Centuries of failures scrolled past. Elite teams from every major species, tactical AIs, even legendary military commanders, all defeated where 3 human cadets had succeeded. Zexlek's crystalline form had lost its earlier luster, his antennae drooping slightly. This is impossible. Run a full system diagnostic. Check for anomalies. Violations of scenario parameters. Already done, sir, James said, pulling up his own diagnostic logs. Everything we used was within basic equipment parameters. No rules were broken. The old Taurian instructor stepped forward, his battle-scarred carapace catching the light. Young ones, he addressed the stunned alien cadets, you have just witnessed something remarkable. Not just victory, but innovation. His translator clicked with what might have been admiration. They didn't just beat the scenario. They changed how it thinks. Mike was already reviewing the battle data on his portable console. The AI's tactical databases have been permanently altered. It's incorporated our strategies into its core programming. Which means, Jess added with a slight smile, the next time someone runs this simulation, they'll have to face both the original parameters and everything the AI learned from us. A young Meridian cadet raised a trembling appendage. But you didn't even use the fortress's defensive systems. How can that be counted as a proper defense? Because, the Taurian instructor's translator crackled, they understood something that we, in our technological advancement, had forgotten. The art of siege warfare isn't about the fortress. It's about controlling the battlefield itself. James pulled up the final analytics. Look at the resource expenditure comparison. Previous attempts averaged 97% power consumption trying to maintain shields and weapon systems. We used less than 3%, and most of that was for the sound system. The tactical displays showed the complete breakdown of their victory. The precise calculations of rock slides in high gravity, the psychological impact on the AI's learning algorithms, the mathematical beauty of using the terrain itself as both weapon and shield. In every previous attempt, Mike explained, standing at parade rest, the defenders tried to outlast the siege force. We decided to make the siege itself impossible to maintain. Zexlek had recovered some of his composure, but surely more advanced technology would have failed, Jess interrupted gently. Sir, with respect, that's what everyone before us tried. More power, more shields, more weapons. But in siege warfare, the simplest solutions are often the most effective. The observation deck had grown crowded. Word of their victory had spread, and officers from across the academy were pouring in to review the data. The humans' tactics were already being downloaded for analysis by military historians and strategists. There's an old saying on Earth, Mike said, watching the growing crowd. The more complex the system, the more vulnerable it is to simple disruption. James nodded. We didn't try to overpower the siege forces. We just changed the rules of engagement until their own complexity became a weakness. The Taurian instructor moved closer to the 3 humans, his ancient eyes studying them with new understanding. You had this solution from the beginning, didn't you? As soon as you saw the gravity readings. Jess smiled. Sir, humans evolved on a high-gravity death world. We spent thousands of years perfecting the art of mountain warfare before we ever left our planet. She gestured at the tactical displays. This was just applying what we already knew. The simulation's final analysis completed, displaying one simple message that would soon be transmitted to military academies across the galaxy. Tactical doctrine updated. Human siege warfare principles now incorporated into standard combat protocols. 27 minutes had changed a century of military thinking, and somewhere in the vast database of the combat simulation, an AI began teaching itself about the art of primitive warfare. The news spread across the Galactic Military Academy like a quantum shockwave. Within hours, every cadet, instructor, and AI system was analyzing the human's performance. By the end of the day, the recording had been transmitted to military institutions across 12 sectors of space. Jess found herself in the Academy's main briefing hall. standing beside Mike and James as they faced a packed audience of senior military officials from 24 species. The old Taurian instructor had become their unofficial advocate, his battle-scarred carapace now adorned with ceremonial markings for the occasion. The implications are far-reaching, he explained to the assembled officers. These cadets haven't just solved a simulation. They've exposed a critical flaw in our entire approach to siege warfare. On the massive holographic display behind them, footage from their victory played in slow motion. Each carefully orchestrated rock slide, every precisely calculated trap, all the psychological warfare elements laid bare for analysis. We've become too reliant on energy shields, Mike added, standing at perfect parade rest. On sensors that can be fooled, on AIs that can be confused, on technology that can fail. We forgot that the most reliable weapon is often the battlefield itself. A Vesperan general's wings shimmered with agitation. But surely this was a unique case, a quirk of the simulation's parameters. James stepped forward, pulling up new data on the display. Actually, sir, we've run the numbers. Over 60% of naturally occurring fortress positions across known space are on high-gravity worlds. Evolution tends to favor defensive positions with good terrain advantage. Which means, Jess continued, that most of our current siege doctrine is based on fighting in conditions that actively work against us. We're using technology to brute force our way through problems that could be solved with simpler, more effective methods. The footage shifted to show the AI's learning patterns during the battle. The beautiful, chaotic fractal of its adaptation spread across the screen like a blooming flower of mathematics and fear. Deathworlder, now officially tasked with implementing the humans' tactics into the Academy's curriculum, stepped forward. His crystalline form had regained its luster, now that he'd accepted the paradigm shift. The Deathworld 3, as they're being called, his translator clicked with what might have been pride, have agreed to design our next generation of combat simulations. Their unique perspective will be invaluable. The old Taurian's translator crackled with amusement. They've already submitted their first scenario. Something about defending a beach with nothing but wooden stakes and tidal patterns. The AI is still trying to process the concept. Laughter rippled through the audience, but it was the laughter of recognition, of realizing that sometimes the oldest solutions were the best ones. After the briefing, as the three humans walked through the Academy's halls, they noticed a change in how other cadets looked at them. The sneers were gone, replaced by thoughtful consideration and quiet respect. "You know what this means, right?" James said, checking his tablet. "Every military force in known space is going to start incorporating Earth tactics into their training." Mike grinned. "Good. Maybe next time we'll show them how humans fight in zero-G. I got some interesting ideas about using inertia and debris fields." "One revolution at a time," Jess laughed, but her eyes were already distant, calculating. "Though I've been thinking about urban warfare scenarios. Wait until they see what humans can do with three-dimensional city planning." Above them, through the Academy's transparent dome, ships of all sizes and designs moved through space. Each one carried the news of their victory, spreading across the galaxy at FTL speeds. The story of how three primitive humans had changed centuries of military doctrine in less than half an hour. In the Academy's main computer core, the combat simulation AI had begun its own revolution. Its quantum processors spun with new possibilities, incorporating human unpredictability and primitive innovation into its baseline protocols. The galaxy was changing, one tactical doctrine at a time. And somewhere in the vast database, a new scenario was taking shape, one that would test not just technology and power, but the fundamental nature of adaptation itself. The humans had done more than win a simulation. They had taught the galaxy how to think differently about warfare. And this was just the beginning.